Welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 9. My name is Matt, and this is a weekly podcast where I review multiple platforms and technologies to see which works best for you. If you've never listened to us before, or if you've been listening for the last few episodes, please give us a review on iTunes, give us a 5-star review, and help us get noticed so that more people can listen to this and we can improve every single week and give you the information that you might find useful. Today's episode, we are going to talk about why I think you should use Linux. And for those of you who maybe have listened since the very beginning, you know that I'm a user of the Linux operating system. And right up front, I'm a technology enthusiast, so I use any technology that works for me. I have a Mac computer. I run Windows occasionally. I use Windows at work. I've got some mobile devices, and I tend to learn tricks of all of them, and I try to share them in these episodes. And in this episode, I'm going to focus primarily on Linux. In our last episode, I talked about how an app called VirtualBox sort of saved the day for me. And I was able to fix a problem where I work with some lighting control stations that had lost power and lost many of their settings, and they didn't work correctly. So I started thinking about where to go from that. We've sort of been discussing open source software occasionally. We sort of talked into the SpaceX happenings from the last few weeks, how they landed a drone ship. And so sort of going from there, my thoughts and processes started wondering, where do I take this next? And with these topics of space and all the technology being used, I wanted to sort of talk about one of my app picks was how to see the International Space Station up in space. And that app, if you recall, was called ISS Spotter. Well, some background information on the space station. A few years ago, the space station actually switched from using Windows to using Linux. And the reason they did that is to sort of improve reliability. They found that Windows wasn't working for them in space. There are many different companies out there, especially in the scientific community, that use Linux. I'll give you another example. The Large Hadron Collider, the 17-mile-long underground tunnel doing physics experiments every single day, uses Linux. There are supercomputers. Some of the most powerful supercomputers in the world all run Linux. And at the same time, even $30 computers such as the Raspberry Pi, and you can go even less expensive, the very least expensive computers can run Linux. And these computers this operating system is scalable from the very tiniest computers to the very oldest computers to the very brand new computers and supercomputers. And how does that relate to you? Well, how many of us have old computers lying around? They may be computers that are 10 years old, or they may be computers collecting dust in a closet somewhere. And if you are interested in learning about something new and you've been looking for a project to use, this might be something that interests you, especially if you sort of like technology. If you've got an old computer, Linux can work on an old computer, depending on what you have for hardware, what you have for a hard drive space or RAM or processor speed. You can pick a version of Linux, a distribution of Linux that will suit your needs. Now, is it going to make this computer run amazing? In some cases, that answer is yes. If you have a computer that's a few years old, or if you have a computer that maybe had Windows Vista on it, or if you had a computer from 2008, 2009, you may find that your computer runs better than it ever has running Linux on it. You may find that if you just want an old computer and you just want somebody to have access to the internet, you can use Linux, and you can use a version of Linux that will not give you all the new fancy bells and whistles, but it's tamed down so that you can actually use that old computer again. So I've been using Linux since 2009, and when I first started using it, it was a learning experience. I didn't know anything about it, and it's all self-taught. So you can do this. Anybody can learn how to use Linux. And it's something that can be something that you set up and never dive into. As a beginner, you could just use it to get access to the internet and check your email. Or you could start diving in and really learning what it's made of and why it's very popular. If you've never heard of Linux or used Linux before, you may actually be using it every single day and not even realize it. If you connect to the internet, believe it or not, you're going to be using Linux. Basically, every server that is on the internet, a vast majority of them, those servers are running Linux. Your internet service provider probably has servers that are running Linux. Firefox is based off of open source software. If you've ever used Firefox, you're using open source software. If you've ever used an Android device, Android is based off of Linux. If you've ever used a Chromebook is basically based off of Linux. So all of these things that we use every single day, we may not even realize it, are based off something called Linux. Why would somebody base something off of Linux when Mac and Windows are the more popular operating systems today? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of them is security. Windows is known for its insecurity. We have to put antivirus on our computers. We have to pay that yearly subscription to antivirus every year in order to keep our information safe. Mac, on the other hand, when you use Mac, it's known for being very secure. One of the reasons why it is very secure is because it's based off of something called UNIX. And it's also based off of something called the Berkeley Secure distribution, which is are both open source software. I want to correct myself. The UNIX is not open source, but variations of UNIX, such as Linux, are now open source and available to everyone for free. So Mac, even though they have a closed source or proprietary software, they're based off of some open source technologies. And that's one of the reasons why they tend to be more secure. Now, in the more recent years, there are more and more vulnerabilities coming out for Mac because Mac is getting more popular with iPhones and iPads. And that's not to say that Linux is perfectly secure. Nothing is perfectly secure, but it's inherently secure from the very beginning. You have to get administrator privileges to do anything on your computer, meaning if you install software on a computer, you type in your password so that your computer knows it's you that's installing these passwords. On Windows, you don't necessarily need to do that. You're running as an administrator all the time on your computer, and that gives anybody access to your computer or your things. So the reason I'm talking about Linux today is because one of the versions of Linux that I started with has recently just released another update, a major update to their operating system. And the distribution of Linux that I started out with was called Ubuntu. I started that in 2009 and I sort of just picked it randomly because I didn't know anything about Linux. And this latest version is called Ubuntu 16.04, and it's what's called an LTS, or long-term support release. So it's going to be available with security updates until 2021 for free. Now the number 1604, what do those mean? 16 is the year, is 2016, and 04 is the month, so April 2016. Ubuntu releases every 6 months with a new release, and if you want the latest and greatest, you can upgrade every 6 months, or you can stay with a long-term support and have a more stable operating system. So if you're looking to install on a computer and just leave it and just get updates occasionally, the long-term support is what I recommend. So how do you try this? How do you try Linux? There's a couple of different things that you can do. So with Linux, it's very easy. You can download what's called an ISO file, and that is all the information, all the files that you need to install Linux. And you can put it onto a CD or a DVD or even a USB drive and plug it into your computer and just start your computer as you were starting Windows or Mac and boot into what's called a live environment. And that's going to show you everything that Linux has to offer without making any changes to your computer. It just boots off of the CD, DVD, or USB drive, and you can try it out for free. And a lot of people use this because they're great tools. I've used live USB drives to fix problems. I've cured Windows viruses with these USB drives, and I've also done online baking in a more secure way using these live USB drives. So you can try Linux without damaging your computer, without installing anything, and if you decide that you like it, you can install it onto your computer. Now, Linux works on most computers, depending on if you have certain graphics cards or newer type of processors or something along those lines. You may run into occasional problems with getting it to work, but for the most part, Linux tends to work on most computers just fine without any problems, and you never have to really look for drivers because it's all provided. It's all installed on the base of Linux, which is called the Linux kernel. So for the most part, you're going to be able to boot into a live environment, test it out. If it works great, try to install it on an old computer if you have a computer collecting dust, and see how it works. You may find it works great, and you may decide to keep trying it. And if you don't have luck the first time around, don't give up. The best part about Linux is the community aspect of Linux, and there is a large community of Linux users on the internet that look to help other people getting started out with Linux. And think of it as free tech support. These people wholeheartedly love to help other people get started with Linux and get people to understand, what's so great about it. There is tons of information online, tons of documentation, and it's all available for free. What do I recommend as a Linux distribution? I recommend starting with Ubuntu. There's also another distribution called Linux Mint that is also very easy to use. Linux Mint and Ubuntu tend to be something that you install and it's ready to use in just a few minutes, and really makes it very easy to use Linux. So, all right, so how do you install Linux? The first thing I'm going to say is do not use this on your primary computer if you're just learning it for the first time. Have a backup computer, an old computer that is dusty or you don't use, and just use it to experiment first. So don't take your work computer and install Linux on it. So you're going to take that ISO file that I was talking about earlier, and you're going to use an app called Unetbootin, and you can download it for free. You can Google it, Unetbootin. It's a very small piece of software that's going to take that ISO file and install it on a USB stick or a DVD. And from there, once it's done doing that, you basically just pick the file that you downloaded and pick the USB drive that you want to put it on and click OK, and it does its thing. So you take that USB drive, stick it in your computer, and turn your computer on. And normally, as the computer's turning on, it'll flash a BIOS screen. You can see where it says boot options, hit F10 or F12 or F7, whatever it is. Hit that and select your USB drive, and it should boot right into what's on the USB drive instead of what's on the computer. And you can try Linux for free without installing it and sort of experiment with it. Some people even use a live USB drive to diagnose problems and fix problems on that computer. They use this to have secure bank transactions where none of the information is going to stay. Once you turn the computer off, all that information is gone. So USB drives have various uses, and I don't know how many times I've used a USB drive to save a computer, transfer files off of failing hardware, things like that. It's great to have a Linux USB drive around to do some of these things. So you can try it out without installing it. If you want to install it, what's great about it is it's going to work on most hardware. In some cases, if you have a weird graphics card or a weird Wi-Fi chip, sometimes you run into problems. But for the most part, it works on more hardware than Windows does, and it's all built into that Linux kernel that I was talking about earlier. So give it a try. If you need help, I would be glad to help you. You can send me an email, MrpTechReviews@gmail.com. I would be glad to help you out and get you on the right track. You can also check out my website, mrptechreviews.wix.com/home, and send me some feedback. Give me some ideas for future shows, and help me improve. Help me keep putting out content that you want to listen to, and help me give you more information. This is one of the reasons I do this is because I love sharing this knowledge, and I hope you're enjoying listening. So that's it for today, and we'll see you next week.